So I want you to imagine something for a second. Visualize this massive upward climbing golden arrow. And this arrow represents all of global human development.
Right, all the progress we've made.
Exactly. But as you look closer at the shiny golden arrow, you notice its shadow. And the shadow is being like actively eaten away by this dark gray grid.
Yeah, that grid is essentially social inequality and environmental destruction.
Right. Because if you just look at the news, we are constantly bombarded with these shiny headlines, like economic growth is up, technological leaps are happening, the markets are breaking records.
It creates this really powerful illusion of prosperity.
It really does. And that brings us to the core counterintuitive bombshell from the stack of global data we are looking at today. Over the past 30 years, the Global Human Development Index, the HDI, it's grown by 24.3%.
Which sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, we look like we are doing incredibly well.
Yeah, but here's the catch. Because of that dark gray grid, specifically social inequality, we are essentially losing over 20% of those hard-won development gains every single year.
Just wiped out.
Wiped out. So our mission for this deep dive is to look at this massive stack of research from the Hidden Costs Behind Development report and, frankly, strip away the averages. If we deduct the environmental damage we are doing, and if we account for the unequal wealth distribution, how much has our true progress actually regressed?
That's the real question.
Yeah.
Because those top-line numbers are hiding so much.
Exactly. And for you listening, we are doing this because you see these GDP numbers on a screen and assume the world is thriving. But we want to show you what is actually happening under the hood of those shiny numbers.
To do that, though, we really have to redefine how we measure progress. I mean, we have to move beyond just looking at the dollar sign, beyond GDP.
Okay, let's unpack this alphabet soup of metrics in the report, because we need a baseline, right? So first, we have the HDI, the Human Development Index. That's our baseline. It's not just money. It's a mix of health, education, and living standards.
Yeah, it maxes out at a perfect score of 1.0.
Then we have the IHDI, the Inequality Adjusted HDI. I kind of view this as the development tax.
That's a great way to put it. It shows what happens to that baseline score when we actually account for the massive gap between the rich and the poor.
Right. Then there's the GDI and the GII, which are the Gender Development and Gender Inequality Indices, basically the measure of social justice and the gender gap.
Exactly.
And finally, the PHDI, which is the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, the ecological price tag of all this progress we're making.
So if we look at the raw, unadjusted HDI, there really was this golden age of growth. Back in 1990, the global HDI was at 0.608.
Okay.
And from there, it just steadily climbed year after year up to a historic peak of 0.745 in 2019.
Wow, so almost 30 years of just straight unbroken progress.
Yeah, humanity was highly resilient. But then we see this huge historical anomaly in the data for 2020 and 2021. The index actually dropped to 0.742.
Which, I mean, that's the pandemic shock, obviously.
Right. It was the first time in 30 years that global growth was just completely interrupted. The devastating shock of COVID-19 wasn't just health. It hit education, supply chains, everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. But then looking at the 2023 data, there was this really strong recovery. We bounced back to 0.756.
We did. We broke the previous record.
Okay, so I have to push back a little here. It sounds like we bounced back perfectly fine. So if HDI is at an all-time high of 0.756, shouldn't we be celebrating? I mean, the system worked, right?
You'd think so. But this is exactly where the IHDI, that inequality-adjusted metric you mentioned, comes in and completely flips the narrative of pure celebration.
Okay, how bad is the flip?
What's fascinating here is that the 2023 IHDI score is only 0.590.
Whoa, from 0.756 all the way down to 590.
Yeah. Mathematically, that represents an overall global loss rate of 21.95%.
Okay, let me paint a picture for you listening, just to make that real. Imagine a freshly baked pie, right? And this pie represents all of global human progress, all the medicine, all the wealth, all the schools.
A very nice pie.
A great pie. But before anyone even gets a slice, someone just walks into the kitchen, slices off 22% of it, and throws it directly in the trash.
Just vaporized.
Vaporized. So if you think the world is progressing perfectly, it's really because you are only looking at the averages. You aren't seeing the trashed pie.
And we can actually break down exactly where that loss is coming from in the data.
Yeah.
Because it's not all equal.
So what's the primary culprit?
Well, there are inequalities in health and education, and those are definitely factors.
Okay.
But income inequality is the absolute biggest culprit by far.
Really? Just the wealth gap?
Yeah, income inequality alone causes a staggering 30.34% loss in the income dimension of the index.
Over 30%. That is wild. And I actually want to do a quick neutrality check right here for the listener.
Good idea.
Because when we start talking about income inequality, it's super easy to assume we're making some sort of political statement, like we're pushing a specific ideology.
Right, capitalism versus socialism or whatever.
Exactly. But we're not. We are simply looking at the raw mathematics from the source material. The data doesn't endorse or condemn any specific political system. It just shows the mathematical gap between the top earners and the bottom earners globally.
Yeah, it's just showing how statistical averages hide the lived reality of the median individual.
Right. It's the difference between how much money a country has in its vault and what the actual people living there are experiencing.
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated when we introduce the environment. Because we've seen how progress is distributed unequally among humans, but what about the cost to the planet we all share?
Oh, man. Yeah, this is the PHDI, the planetary pressures adjustment.
Right. And the core question here is so important. Are we just overdrawing our descendants' future to pay for today's HDI?
I mean, the data on our material footprint is kind of terrifying.
It's a massive explosion.
Right.
If you look at 1990, the global material footprint was 8.672 tons per person.
Oh, so almost 9 tons of just raw earth biomass, fossil fuels, metals dug up for every single person.
Yeah. But by 2023, that number exploded to 12.714 tons per person.
Wow.
That is an almost 47% increase in our material footprint.
That blows my mind. So we are just devouring the physical earth at an accelerating rate. And what happens to the math when we apply that?
We get hit with a double penalty. We already lost 22% to inequality.
Bro.
When we adjust the HDI for planetary pressure, so carbon emissions and this massive material footprint, the global HDI shrinks by another 10.053%.
Another 10% gone. It's like, imagine business, right? You're running this high revenue factory. Profits are through the roof. That's our high HDI.
Right. The company looks great on paper.
Exactly. But then you realize the factory is keeping the furnaces burning by literally ripping out the woody support beams of its own foundation.
Right.
High HDI is currently coming at the exact cost of high planetary pressure.
We're burning down the house to stay warm.
Exactly. Okay, so we've looked at wealth, we've looked at the environment, but let's look at the dividing line that splits the global population exactly in half. Gender.
Yeah, the Gender Development Index and the Gender Inequality Index. And there are some really positive trends here, surprisingly.
There are. Let's start with the good news. The GDI is approaching parity, approaching a score of 1. It reached 0.955 in 2023.
Which is great. And the GII, the Inequality Index, where a lower score is better, fell from 0.582 in 1993 all the way down to 0.45 in 2023.
That's a huge drop. And there's this one specific data point about political gains that I just found fascinating.
Oh, the parliament seats.
Yes. Women's share of parliament seats globally has more than doubled. It went from roughly 11.5% in 1990 to 26.54% in 2023.
So more than a quarter of all global political seats are held by women now. That's real structural progress.
But what about the financial realities?
Yeah, the economic reality is stark.
Yeah.
Despite that increased political participation, the global female gross national income, the GNI per capita, is only $14,943.
Wait, 14,000?
Yep. While the male GNI per capita is $25,750.
That is a shocking income gap. I have to push back on this. How is it functionally possible that women are gaining so much more political representation, but their economic power is still roughly half of men's?
It's a massive disconnect.
Like, are these political seats not translating to actual economic leverage?
Well, it shows that you can change election laws and representation much faster than you can restructure a deeply entrenched global economic system. Unpaid care work, wage gaps in female-dominated industries, those things don't disappear overnight just because there are more women in parliament.
The concrete floor is a lot harder to break than the glass ceiling, I guess?
Exactly. Now, to make all these massive global numbers concrete, the report actually shifts focus.
Right. We are zooming in on a very specific case study, the island nation of Cabo Verde. or Cape Verde.
It's such a perfect example to illustrate these paradoxes.
Okay, let me set the scene for you listening. Geographically, Cabo Verde is an archipelago off the coast of West Africa. And looking at the 2023 data, they have an HDI of 0.668.
Right, which ranks them 142nd in the world.
Yeah, 142nd. So they are officially considered a lower middle human development country.
But here's where we find a massive counterintuitive finding. Let's look at their healthcare. Cabo Verde's life expectancy at birth is 76.059 years.
76 years. That is almost 3 full years higher than the global average of 73.38 years.
It's a healthcare miracle, honestly. And you know why it's so wild?
The income disconnect.
Exactly. Cabo Verde's G&I per capita is only $8,165.
Wow. Compared to the global average of over $20,000.
Right, $20,327 to be exact. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves a really critical point. Low-income countries actually can achieve high life expectancy.
They don't need to be billionaires to keep people alive.
No. Medical accessibility, community health, targeted health policies, those can entirely offset a lack of massive national wealth.
It's amazing, but it forces a question. If their healthcare is so incredibly good and people are living to 76, why is their overall global rank still stuck down at 142nd?
Yeah, that brings us right back to our central theme.
Yeah.
The hidden costs. There are hidden fractures in Cabo Verde's society.
And the rankings avalanche in the data is just shocking. In 2015, Cabo Verde ranked number 17 globally in the Gender Development Index. Number 17, that is an absolute high point.
A global leader.
But by 2023, they plummeted down to number 103.
It's a free fall.
So my question is, did they suddenly go backward? Did they start taking rights away, or did the rest of the world just hit the gas and accelerate past them?
It's largely the latter, but they also hit a massive structural wall. And to find the cracks, we have to unpack their education data. It's what we call the education shadow.
Okay, what does that mean?
There's a huge gap between expectations and reality. The expected years of schooling in Cabo Verde, how long a kid entering the system is expected to stay, is 11.367 years.
So almost finishing high school.
Right. But the actual mean years of schooling, what the adult population actually has, is only 6.090 years.
Just 6 years. That is a deficit of over 5.2 years.
Exactly. And that creates an education inequality loss rate of 27.39%. It's huge. Kids might be expected to go to school, but economic realities force them to drop out.
And that leads right into the crushing hidden tax of their overall inequality, right?
Yes. If you look at Cabo Verde's overall IHDI, their total loss to inequality is 28.443%.
Which is significantly worse than that global average of roughly 22% we talked about earlier.
Much worse. Distribution of wealth is their core roadblock. They can't jump to the next development tier because the inequality is holding them down.
It's holding them hostage. But it's not all bad news under the surface. In fact, in 2 very specific areas, Cabo Verde is kind of modeling the future for the rest of us.
They really are.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at their Gender Inequality Index, the GII, because there is a massive bright spot here. Women in Cabo Verde hold a stunning 41.667% of parliament seats.
That is incredible. They're holding up half the political sky.
It vastly outperforms the global average of 26.5%. They are democratizing political power far better than most developed nations.
And the second silver lining brings us back to the planetary pressure data. They have a truly clean development model.
Yeah. The numbers here are crazy. Their carbon dioxide emissions are an incredibly low 0.894 tons per capita.
Compared to the global average of 4.536 tons?
I mean, picture this audio graphic for a second. On one hand, you have Cabo Verde as this clean green lung. And on the other hand, the global average is a massive black factory smokestack.
That's essentially it. Cabo Verde's development, even with its struggles with internal inequality, places almost zero extra ecological burden on the Earth.
They aren't burning the foundation to keep the factory running.
No, they aren't.
Okay, so zooming out from Cabo Verde back to the global picture for our listener, we have covered a massive amount of ground. How do we make sense of all these conflicting data points? What's the synthesis here?
From an academic perspective, I'd synthesize 3 core lessons from this data stack. First is resilience, but volatility.
Okay.
HDI growth is incredibly resilient over the long term, but it is highly subject to massive sudden shocks like the pandemic. Progress isn't inevitable.
Right. And the second?
The ultimate enemy. Inequality is the #1 predator of human progress. It eats 22% of everything we achieve globally.
The trash pie.
Exactly. And the third lesson is the decoupling effect. Cabo Verde proves that high health and political equality can exist totally independently of massive economic size. But conversely, education quality and wealth distribution are much harder to fix quickly.
So if I were to summarize the overarching thesis of this report, we can no longer judge a country merely by how fast it is running its raw HDI.
Right.
We must look at what it abandons while it runs, the human souls left behind by inequality, and the future compromised by planetary pressure.
That is the core argument, beautifully stated.
So as we look towards redefining 2030, what is the practical application of this knowledge? What policy shifts do we actually need?
We have to move our mindset from scale to fairness. Economically, there needs to be a strict priority to address income distribution, especially in areas where loss rates exceed 30%.
We have to stop the wealth gap from eating the Janes.
Exactly. Educationally, we have to deepen actual access. We have to bridge that gap between expected and actual schooling so kids don't drop out at year 6.
And ecologically,
Ecologically, we must embrace the low-carbon green contract model shown by nations like Cabo Verde.
we need their 76-year life expectancy, but without the developed world's 13-ton material footprint.
Precisely, that's the goal.
It really redefines what true progress is for you, the listener. Progress isn't a pile of statistics or a GDP number on a screen. True progress means every individual has a baseline of fairness, allowing for a longer, more dignified life trajectory.
A life that doesn't cost the Earth its future.
Exactly. Well, we have reached the end of our deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this complex, custom-tailored journey through the global data stack.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It really has. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder. Throughout this whole deep dive, we've treated development as an inherently good thing that just needs to be managed better, right?
Yeah, that's the general assumption.
But looking at the crushing planetary pressures, is it possible that the entire concept of continuous, endless development is fundamentally flawed? What if, in the future, the ultimate sign of a successful civilization isn't how much it has developed, but its ability to finally stand completely still in perfect equilibrium? Keep digging, everyone.